Hey, what's up, guys? This is Grandmaster Jacek Stopa, and welcome to my course on calculation. So basically, we'll be dealing with some concepts of tactics from a variety of perspectives based on some examples that we will start with some pretty basic ones, and we'll get into something very complicated later on. This is meant to be a relatively comprehensive course where I will be introducing a variety of principles that we should be following when dealing with some tactics. Tactics is basically something inherent to the game of chess. We deal with it pretty much on every single move. There is some calculation to be made. We know that the positions branch out very fast. Somebody asks you how far you can calculate. Best response you can give is it depends on the position, because in some relatively simple positions, it's probably easy to go very far. Whereas in more complex positions, it's very difficult to sometimes even calculate the first few moves, because your opponent just has so many possibilities to respond that you can never be sure if you've taken into account everything. We will be starting here with a few simple examples. This is an example from an endgame. It's a famous educational endgame setup where we have 3 against 3 here. And something that we should be starting with usually is the evaluation of the position. So some positions are evaluation heavy, where we need to understand who is better just based on that. Other positions are more like, they're extremely tactical. It's still good to have a gist of who's better based on some principles, but for the most part, it's just kind of a, down to the straightforward calculation to kind of determine who's doing better. So in this example, it's white to start, and basically it's good to have this concept of candidate moves. This is something that I think was originally introduced in Panchenko's book on endgames, in the endgame theory. But it has been a guiding principle, basically, I guess, since the beginning of chess, because it's just the most logical way of thinking of calculation. We need to come up with some options here. That's basically the idea of candidate moves. What options are serious, what are not, which options are not so serious. So here, it looks like unless white does something fast, white will be in trouble when this king comes to action. So in a pawn endgame, the activity of the king is extremely important. We see that from this particular point of view, black is ahead. His king is on this, well, really ideal square g3, blocking out the white king, not allowing the king to come in, and threatening to basically take all the pawns in turn with the move king g4. So this is the first signal that white has to be fast. We can reject all the king moves. King f1 doesn't do much. Well, actually, as we'll see in a bit, even this position would be good, but just because of the trick that leads this position. Obviously, king h1 is a terrible move, right? So let's consider all the pawn moves then. Well, let's try f6. Okay. f6, well, we'll now take a look at black's possibilities. So we obviously reject all the king moves. There's a threat. So black, let's say, plays g6 or gf. Okay. And we quickly realize that this position has to favor black. It's basically winning. So we go f6 again, and we consider anything else, and we realize there is nothing. So f6 probably doesn't really change much. h6. Okay. Well, same. gh, gh. King comes in. We're too slow. We escape, but black is very fast again. And we're done. So that doesn't work either. Just with this elimination method, we're able to arrive at the winning possibility g6, this famous breakthrough that I'm pretty sure everybody knows. It's just I'm using this basic example as a means of introducing this calculation basic concept. So g6, why is it so great? Well, as a double threat, black has no time to make a useful move. And if black captures this, now there's a straightforward way to win, and that is h6, as I'm sure you guys have guessed. gf loses to hg, and gh f6. This is basically over. And if hg, we need to calculate this as well. Now, okay, f6 wins the same exact trick. We're clearing the path for this pawn, and this is basically over, as gh doesn't help either due to fg. So that is a winning setup. Now we basically need to just double check if there is anything else that we're missing, and if we realize there is nothing missing, we need to ask ourselves just how winning is this? Do we need to look for anything more effective, or is this sort of winning enough, so to speak? And we realize that basically this has to be completely winning. So we kind of use some further calculation or some basic knowledge to determine the outcome of this game. g6, and that's it. So what I was talking about before is if we really need to kind of determine fully what this position is, we'll realize that this will also be winning for the same reasons. But here, obviously, after this relatively careless move, black will have a different option, and that is g6, after which the position is no longer winning because our breakthrough doesn't go. Well, black has to be careful because, for instance, f6 will be pretty unlucky here. Again, breakthrough and winning. Same thing against h6. And there's f6 winning as well. So this is something to keep in mind. This is important. And let us now jump into the second example. They're all named very basic. So this one basically just this is super simple. This is basically checkmate in 2. And I want to introduce the concept of a chess composition or chess problem. I used to compete in these tournaments in solving chess problems when I was younger. And those are basically not taken from games, but they're composed by these chess players who deal with this discipline known as the composers of chess problems. And this will be a major part of this course, actually, as we'll see later. But for now, I just wanted to briefly discuss why this would not be a good chess problem. Because, well, on the first side, there would be a basic knight d7. And this is checkmate. The problem, I mean, the reason why this is not a good problem is basically any knight move except for this one accomplishes the same exact goal, because the only move that black has is king a8, and there's the same checkmate. It's a trivial example, but it nonetheless introduces some important principle that I will expand on later. Now, is there any other options? Well, it turns out there are. Let's maybe first consider king moves. Is this going to checkmate in 2? Well, it won't, because we're letting the king out here. But any rook move along this the 8th rank does the job just as well as the knight moves. Basically, black has no other option than king a8 and captures with checkmate. Multiple solutions, and that's why this is not a good chess problem. Here's another position. This is another pawn endgame, just like our first example. And this one is a little bit more complex, I'd say, but it's a nice calculation example. So what are some of the candidate moves that need to be talked about here in this position? What would be something that white can do here? We can start with some basic evaluation ideas. Maybe the pawn structure is not good for white because of these double pawns. But there is a big plus because white pawns are more advanced. It matters dramatically in pawn endgames because these pawns are closer to the promotion squares. So this principle speaks in white's favor. But the majority of this is just basically sheer calculation. So how many moves do you guys think are worthy of considering? Just judging from this position, what are some serious options here for both sides? Please feel free to stop this video at any point and just kind of try to answer these questions on your own. This is how you can learn the most out of it, rather than just waiting for me to answer all the questions, because then there's not much of a transfer of knowledge here. So how many moves are possible? Maybe we can start with that. Okay, well, there's one pawn move. There's another one, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, 4, 2 king moves, 2 pawn moves, total 4. Okay. So 2 of those moves are obviously bad, but 2 of the other 2 are pretty good, just kind of on the first side of it. So b5 actually is obviously a terrible move because it gives up the pawn for basically nothing, and this position is lost. Another move is king c4. This is just an anti-positional move. The pawn endgame kind of going back. This is a risky choice, so we should reject it because there are obviously better moves in b6 or d5. Okay. Now, there are some exceptions, obviously, to this kind of a perfunctory overview of any position. There are cases, quite rare, that a move like king c4 could be considered better for some strange reasons. There actually is a subdiscipline, or actually a subgroup of these compositions that I had mentioned earlier, referred to as the studies or etudes from the Russian language, from the word etudy, which are especially composed just to kind of have some counterintuitive ideas to them, for purposes of difficulty. But that happens mostly in these quixotic composition contests that I talked about. Rarely does it happen in practical games, because practical games are basically just played with the purpose of winning, not winning in a difficult manner or anything like that. So we're quite safe to assume that king d6 and d5 are the way to go here, and we need to decide which one is better. Well, that is difficult just based on this position. So just after all this thought process that I just considered, it is time to sort of consider the real possibilities. Okay, so let us start with the move d5. So there is a threat here. What do you guys think black wants to do? So now we have to assume black's role and kind of go again with the same process. So black, what can black do? Well, how many moves total? 1, 2, 3 king moves, 1, 2 pawn moves. Okay, so 5 total. And again, let us do some pruning or rejecting of some of these possibilities. A5 is obviously a terrible move due to these two reasons. Well, mostly BA. I would imagine this position can still be a little bit tricky. Let's draw, okay. But BA will give some problems to black here. Anyway, that's a quickly rejectable option. So are these two king moves because of DC. Why would black do that? Okay, and now a controversial move, king d7. Position of this sort, where a5 draws. So black can probably get a draw here. But there's also CD, which sort of looks better on the first sight. But, well, what is this position? King d5, king d7, opposition, and looks on the first sight a little bit dangerous maybe now for white, because, well, a lot of moves sort of get white in trouble here. Well, except for the move c5. Black is trying hard to win, maybe this way. Push the white king away. But the move b5 should basically draw for white. So white is in trouble here. White cannot use his advancement advantage. Just some basic pawn knowledge will tell you that it is white fighting for a draw. Okay, b5. This position is a draw. So we can verify here because of this opposition pattern. So this is again knowledge. Not much for black to do here. So black may decide to try this position for a win with the move a5. This is a big question. Is this winning or not? Well, let's see. King c4. Okay, long opposition. If a4, now king b4, this is okay. King d6 would be a try though. Okay, well, what happened here? So again, serious options, king d4 and king b3. Obviously, this is kind of a pointless option. So is this. So we have now two candidate moves. King b3 runs into king c5. This is lost. King a3 is an option because this is the idea. But what happened here? Obviously, king b5, later capturing this one. King c5, king a4, and lost. But, okay, instead of this move, actually, king b4, and this is repetition. Now black has to be also a bit careful because white will have these kinds of options. Actually, here when the king is too far, this position becomes, let's just say, stalemate. But this position becomes a draw as well. So now the question becomes what happens if a4 is played. Well, king c4. This is again the draw from earlier. A2 leads to similar dynamic. And again, this position is drawn. So we may go back here and we get the gist that the d5 basically will be a draw. So let us see if we can play for a win with the move king d6. The intuition should say that this is the strongest option, as now maybe white will have a try. So two serious options, but obviously only one of them kind of deserves serious attention because this will run into some problems. Now this becomes lost because of this necessity to play with a pawn. Neither pawn move is good, so this is losing. King d8 with opposition now gives white the problem of, well, what to do next. Now d5 runs into the position from earlier, which was a draw. King e6 runs into king e8, and we quickly realize that there's nothing better than this repetition. So this is a drawn position after this calculation. That can be determined. But as you guys can tell, this position has some complexity to it. It's useful to be familiar with some basic pawn endgames because it makes it easier to evaluate. When we calculate some position, at some point we realize that there's this need for evaluation. We cannot calculate to checkmate usually, well, the vast majority of the time. So there is some need to basically make some conclusions at some point, and this is such a case where basically our knowledge serves us to make these earlier conclusions. Now let us jump into the next example. This is also a pawn endgame. It's a little bit tricky. What are some candidate options for white? So we can argue this is one interesting plan. So king d5. And, well, if it doesn't work out, maybe b5 is also an option, but it looks risky. So we have to kind of be careful here. But okay. So evaluation, this is just difficult to evaluate. Well, this will really be down to the particulars of this position. It's still nonetheless a relatively simple example, but yeah, we just sort of need to calculate what is going on here. It's one of those positions where sometimes being on the move is not the best. Maybe white wishes that black was on the move to make some inferior move like king b8, after which king d5, king a7, king e6, king b6, king d7 will be possible with danger, because now actually when we get to the concrete calculations we realize that king d5 is going to lead white into problems. So this, we can conclude that black is better, but from the white side we still don't know if we're losing, or maybe we can hold it. So that's basically where we can kind of end it, just kind of, thinking like this. Okay, king d5 is one of the options. It doesn't look so great. White is in trouble here. So let us consider the other option now, because we know that maybe it will be better. So b5, let us see b5. Now two options for black, ab and a5. Okay, if ab, we know we're fine. This position is basically a draw, as white cannot really play this for a win. When this idea is too late, he will have to catch this draw again, just like we saw in the previous example. Shift it to the b file. But there is no need for that. This is basically a very straightforward drawn setup. So b5, but black has a more dangerous, or seemingly more dangerous move, a5. And now this is an important moment. Well, what happens here? We have to first see what are the real options. The most intuitive looks king c4, perhaps, to kind of try to show some respect to this pawn, maybe king d5, but this will run into problem of king b6, where now this position will be lost. King d5, also king b6. We can't really do this, as this will be lost. And okay, perhaps king c4. This king b4 and draw again. Although it's okay, looks more promising. Perhaps some players would be happy with this kind of an outcome and just quickly snap on this, thinking, okay, maybe I'm in trouble here. I should probably make this move to have this draw, okay, because king b6 looks very dangerous. But when we think harder about this, we underestimate our own strengths here, and it turns out that actually white has a powerful block here, and white ends up on top. b6, powerful move. b6 check, as after cb, there is king d6, and actually this threat is just too powerful. Or even faster, right? I guess checkmate info can be delivered, right? So this relatively straightforward. b5 and b6. What if black is trying to stop the progress of this pawn, hoping for this kind of a position where black will be winning? Well, now white shows last final precision after king d7. This game is over. White is winning again, as black is just not fast enough there. Promotion, and that's it. That's one of the goals. We need to basically use our knowledge of some basic endgames to determine that the way white could conceivably win this position is because of the promotion. Well, so black is in trouble. Well, if he tries to draw this way, well, this time the move b7 comes into play. What is this position? Is king a6 possible? Well, obviously not. This is a stalemate. But again, we use some knowledge, or okay, some simple calculation just, and we realize this is obviously a win. So white wins this game. b5. So if we were black here, we would basically go for AB, knowing that a5, although looks promising, but actually is lost due to a concrete shot of b6. There is no point to analyze anything like this. Yeah, this is actually a draw, yes, but a risky draw, right? Because you can imagine white going. Basically, why would black want to enter this kind of a strange setup with black can just draw smoothly here? So basically, now let me just quickly recap what we have done here. Is we introduced some basic examples to go over the basic ideas of this course. There is course on tactics, on calculation, and that is the idea of elimination, where we kind of end up only considering the good moves, and then the idea of candidate moves, which is very related. Basically, is just kind of looking at the real options. So they complement each other, because you can argue that it's only after we eliminate certain options that we arrive at those that are worthy of some serious consideration.